what really matters is human contact and stories. I've spent all my professional life in medicine listening to people's stories. I've had many students attached to me from other parts of medicine who come over to do their 3 months or their 6 months psychiatry, and they've come with their heads stuffed full of symptoms and diagnoses and treatments and prognoses which they've learnt by rote. And I've had to say to them, look, while you're with me at least, put all that on one side, get it all out of your head, and just listen to what these children, what these families are going to tell you, because they all have stories to tell. Painful, miserable, happy, traumatic, anxiety-provoking, desolate, sometimes so painful it's almost difficult to bear. But they've come to you to offload those stories to you, sometimes for the first time in their life. And that is an immense privilege. Handle it with care and learn to listen, which, as we all know, is a very, very difficult skill, a very positive skill, a very active skill. Play is one way of listening to those stories, and to me it's the most vital way of all. I think one of the things I've often done with older kids is to reenact things in sort of as if fantasy. I was working with a couple of kids, a boy aged 6 and his sister who was 9. Their dad, who was a lorry driver, had been killed in a road traffic accident. And he'd survived for about 12 hours. He'd been taken to the intensive therapy unit, intensive care unit in a local hospital. And there, the mum and the nurses and the doctors together had made a decision that the children should not be brought to see him. And I understand that. He was probably very mutilated. So these kids were very angry that they hadn't been to see their dad. That's what the biting the teacher was about. And we tried ways of getting mum and these two kids to share their feelings about this, and it was very difficult. And then one day they came to the clinic, and this particular clinic was a rambling old house with a caretaker who lived on the premises, and always lots of animals around. And we had a new cat. It was a very old, tatty cat, actually, but it was new to Pres Wilford. And when I went down to the waiting room to collect them, they were stroking the cat. So I said, why don't you bring the cat up with you? So the cat came up the stairs, stayed for a few seconds, and then left. And we talked about the cat. And they told me that they'd had a cat once, and it had got run over. And they took the cat to the vet, and the vet took the cat behind the screens and so on, and in another room, and then eventually came to them and said, I'm afraid your cat has died. I've had to help him to die because he was in pain, and it was too difficult for him to live. And they said, can I see him? And he said, no. And they talked about how angry they'd been about that. And I said, well, that's a bit like your dad, isn't it? You know, that people made a decision that you couldn't see your dad when he was dying in hospital. And they said, yes, it's just like Dad. And I said, would you like a chance, if you had it, to say what you had wanted to say to your dad before he died? Yes, they would. And we talked about the sort of things that they would like to say. And I said, well, suppose we kind of reenact that here. I said, if we've got two chairs together and I lay on the chairs pretending to be your dad, perhaps your mum could bring you this time and you could sit by my bed and you could say those things. And they kind of thought, said, yeah, they'd like to do it. Mum looked very askance doing this business, as I think I would have done as well as a parent. But she went along with it, and they came in and they sat by my bed and they said the things that they'd wanted to say to Dad. And I said the things, now knowing quite a lot about Dad, that I thought he would have wanted to say to them before he died. And Mum was sitting at the back, not taking part in this, until all of a sudden she rushed forward and grabbed me by the wrist and looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I never knew if you knew how much I loved you." And at that point, they began to grieve openly together. And the kids understood why they hadn't been let in. And Mum understood that she'd made a mistake. And they could talk about that. So I think reenactment is a very special form of play. But it's a difficult form of play, and difficult to do. And I guess we only do it if we know our clients pretty well. And we can make that distinction between fantasy and reality, as if and for real.